Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Tuesday night beginner series. I'm so happy you could join me tonight. And what I thought we would do is, as I mentioned in my last video, work with some heat embossing. It's one of the few things that we haven't really touched on yet. So I thought that it would be great to go ahead and do that. It's kind of the natural progression of things. And if you can see on the card, and let me pull that up a little bit so you can see it, I've used quite a bit of heat embossing on this one. It's just so much fun, and it really adds a touch of elegance to your cards. So that's what we're going to be doing tonight. Also, we'll be working with two stamp sets. One of them is called Flourishing Phrases, and this is actually a fairly large stamp set. It comes in 2 cases, but I've just got the one here because we're going to be using this beautiful flourish. And it's almost like we're going to be making our own DSP. And then the other stamp set that we're going to be using is Beautiful Bouquet, and we're going to take our sentiment, wishing you a day of love and happy memories from that. So I think what I'll do is use this as my Mother's Day card. I haven't gotten my Mother's Day cards done yet, so it's a good opportunity for me to go ahead and do that. Hang on a second, I forgot to mute the speakers on my other computer. There we go. I have to have it going so I can see any comments that you all make. All right, this is my standard top folding card. So it's a piece of rich Razzleberry cardstock. I just love that color. And it's cut at 4 1/4 by 11, scored at 5 1/2. So let me bring out the goodie bag here. Take out the Altoids. I had the card propped up so that the glare wouldn't be too bad and you could actually see it. So here we've got the card base, and then I've cut a piece of Whisper White for our design panel. For those of you who may be new to my channel and not watched any of my previous videos, a design panel simply means that we're not stamping directly on the card base. We're actually using another piece of paper to stamp on. And this one is cut just a little bit shorter than my card base. It measures 5 1/4 inches by 4 inches. And so that's what we're going to do our stamping on. I already have my stamp mounted, and this is what's called a clear stamp as opposed to a photopolymer stamp. A lot of people get those confused. Here's a photopolymer stamp, and you can see through those. So a lot of people think that a clear stamp is actually photopolymer. But clear simply means you're using a clear block to mount the stamp on. The other type of stamp that you can get is called a wood mount. And so this whole piece would actually be mounted on a block of wood. All right, let's go ahead and get started. For heat embossing, there's a few things that we're going to need. We're going to need some clear, sticky ink, and I'm using Versamark. And that's so that our embossing powder will have something to stick to. And because I've been handling this design panel, I also want to use our Embossing Buddy. And it's just a little pouch that's filled with a powdery substance that you pat all over your card. What that does is it covers up any oil or any residue that could cause the embossing powder to stick to places that you don't want it to stick to. The other thing we're going to be using is a heat tool. They are a little bit loud, so I'll try and pull it away for at least part of our embossing, but I do want you to see the magic of it turning from a matte embossing powder to a very shiny one. All right, so I'm going to take my stamp, and because it's a large stamp, rather than bringing the stamp to the pad, I'm going to bring the pad to the stamp. And that way I can make sure that I get it inked up. Now you'll notice my stamp is hanging over the edge. That's for two reasons. Number one, I didn't have a big enough block and I still haven't unpacked my Stamparatus. But also because we're not going to use the full stamp on the card base. It looks very organic when your stamped images run off of your design panel rather than just seeing the whole image. All right, so I've got this nice and sticky, and I think you can see that it's nice and covered with a sticky ink because it looks very shiny there. And then I'm simply going to decide where I want my stamped image to be. And I'm going to bring out some scrap paper because I will be going off the page, number one, but number two, because the embossing powder gets everywhere. All right. And this ink stays sticky for a long time. So even though I've been talking, it's not going to dry out. All right, so I'm going to come over here to the edge. And as I mentioned, having your stamp run off the page makes it look very organic. So I'll go ahead and put it right there, running off the edge. I can see that. Let me see if I can shine it a little bit. I think you can see a little bit right there. So I can see where my stamped image is. But if you have a hard time seeing it, you can go ahead and use your embossing powder on the portion that you've already stamped. I simply have mine in this nice little container. I'm using the gold embossing powder from Stampin' Up. And I've got a little spoon in here, which helps me control most of the time the powder. So I'll just bring up, and I know I did the bottom left portion. So I'm going to go ahead and spoon it over, tap it gently, and then if there are any places like right here, I see I didn't get full coverage, just put more powder down, tap it off very carefully, and then look at it again. Now, once I've got my embossing powder down, other people may continue stamping, but I'm clumsy. I always end up knocking some of the powder off. And if you ever do see any speckles that you don't want in a place on there, you can just flick it away with your finger, or if it's close to the image, use a fine paintbrush, an artist brush, and you can brush away that. But what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and heat emboss it. And that way I don't have to worry about it. Now, for heat embossing, you certainly can hold it and use the heat tool on it. Your paper warps just a little bit, but it straightens back out after it cools down. But I found a trick with using just a little cheese board. So I just put a binder clip on there. And now what that's going to do is it's going to help keep my paper from warping, but it also gives me a bigger surface to hang on to, so that I don't burn my fingers. Now, it's going to get loud. I will tell you that the first time you use your heat tool for a session, you need to let it warm up. So I'm going to turn it on and give it probably about 10 seconds to warm up before I try putting it to paper. So here we go. Cover your ears. I'm just testing it against my arm. All right, and then what I'm going to do is I am holding it against the paper. I'm not doing this motion because you want to concentrate the heat until you see it start turning. Can you see how it's starting to get shiny? If I pull it away, you can see parts of it aren't shiny. That's how you know which part has been done. I'm just going to go ahead and keep doing this until I make sure that all of my embossing powder is melted. And once I am, I can turn it off. All right. And that's the magic of heat embossing. And you can see how the entire image is shiny, except I see right here on the edge, there's a little bit that's not. Sometimes you can't tell until you really hold it up to the light. So let's just put more heat on it. And there we go. All right, it's that easy to do your heat embossing. Some people would maybe just put a few more up here at the top right and call it done. There's no right or wrong to how much heat embossing you do on a card. As you can see from this one, I not only put it along the bottom left and along the top, I also ran a little bit here down the bottom right. I'm going to take the paper off the cutting board and continue with my stamping. So I'll bring my stamp back in and ink it up again. And I'm not going to use the full stamp for this because I just want a little bit down here in the corner. And you can angle your stamp. You can do it straight up, however you think looks best for you. So I've got a little bump out here and there's a little curve in my stamp there. So that seems like a match made in heaven. And there we go. Again, I don't know if you can see that, but now because I want to do one more up here at the top right, I'm just going to turn my card and continue on. I don't have to worry about running into the image I've already stamped, so I don't feel the need to sprinkle it with powder right away. And again, I'm just going to pick a spot, apply firm, gentle pressure, and pull it up. And I think that's all we need to do. So I'll put my Versamark away and my stamp pad, and let's bring back in our embossing powder. Put some in this corner. Now here's a good example of where I've got some that I don't want. So all I'm going to do is just brush it away. Very carefully. Sometimes you can also blow it away. My goodness, it even stuck to my fingernail. But you want to make sure that you get any of that off that you don't want. Otherwise, what it's going to do is when you heat set it, there will be little gold flecks. And if you like that look, hey, nothing wrong with that. All right, now let's go over here to the other corner that I just stamped. And we'll put some right there. And make sure I have good coverage. Looks good to me. So now we're going to bring back in our cutting board. Being careful not to put our fingers in it. And I'm going to clamp it back down. Our heat tool comes back on and we'll melt the rest of it. And because my heat tool is still pretty hot, I didn't feel the need to preheat it the way I did before. So as long as you're doing your heat embossing all in one sitting, it should go relatively quickly. And as you can see, I'm just holding it over the area, and then once it starts turning, you want to move the heat to the next area, because if you overheat embossing powder, it can start to bubble up. Pull that up and make sure. And I think we're done with doing our heat embossing. Yep, looks pretty done to me. And as you can see, because I used the cheese board or small cutting board, it really didn't warp my paper very much at all. If you have a little warping, like I said, when it cools off, it will flatten out. But also remember, we're going to be gluing the design panel down to our card base, and that also will help it flatten out. All right. If you do get embossing powder on your work surface, I will tell you that a Swiffer cloth is perfect for picking it up. Easy cleanup with that. Now the next thing I did, let me bring the card back in, is I decided that because we're putting it on this rich razzleberry card base, I wanted to add some of that rich razzleberry color into areas that I heat embossed. So I'm going to use my Stampin Blends for that. I've got light and dark rich razzleberry and light and dark old olive. One of the really nice things about heat embossing is it forms a barrier. I don't have to worry so much about going outside the lines because it's like it forms a little well right where the heat embossing is. And I can even, I'm going to use my brush tip just because it lays down some good color. I'm just going to go in and start adding color. And if you get any on the heat embossing, when the color is dry, you can just take a tissue and wipe it right off of the heat embossed area so it resists your ink. All right, so I'm just going to go in and quickly color these. Doesn't take long at all. So just laying down color inside those flowers. Oh, I left one out right here. Okay. And then I also decided this little flourish that comes off of the plant stem, that I would do that in the rich razzleberry as well. So I'll just lay some color in there very quickly. I did do a little bit of shading with my rich razzleberry dark, and I'm going to use the nib end this time because I really want to control where that dark color goes. I'm just going to lay in a few shadows where petals would overlap. And you don't have to be precise about this, just kind of go in, and wherever it makes sense to you, lay down some additional color. And then come back with your light color. And I'm picking up a little bit here. I'm trying to blend in the edges, but I'm not going all the way to the edge of the petals because that way it gives me added depth while still blending my dark rich razzleberry and my light rich razzleberry. Flip it around and do the other side. Just a couple of flowers here. So as you can see, coloring really does not take very long. Of course, these images, these flowers are pretty small, but the adding in the color with the blends just makes it look so rich and helps tie in your card base. And that quick, we've got our flowers done. I do want to come in and lay in some color for the leaves. For that, I only used my light color of old olive. Just wanted to give them a little bit of color. Was not so concerned about shading them. You certainly can if you like, but I really wanted the flowers to be what pops out of the card at you. Turn this around and quickly coloring in those leaves. And we are almost done with the coloring part. I find coloring very, very relaxing, but there are times when you just need to get it done quickly, and this works really well for that. All right, just a couple more leaves here. These tiny ones, I'm just barely touching the color to the paper. If I end up having a little bit of white left over, that's fine. And there we go. All of our coloring is done. Pretty pretty. Okay, now the next thing that we're going to do is let's just go ahead and glue this down to our card base. And for that, I'm going to use good old multi-purpose liquid glue. Just put a generous amount on the back, but don't get gloppy because you don't want it seeping out the edges. And make sure you've got your card so it opens up the right way. I like that side better. And we're going to lay it down, leaving just a small border all the way around. And remember, with your liquid glue, you do have a moment where you can make some adjustment. And there we go. So that's the hard part. Next, let's work on our sentiment. So for our sentiment, we get to use one of my favorite punches. I think they call this the Everyday Label Punch, but I love this because you can actually stamp on your sentiment on your scrap paper, and then if you've gotten it crooked, no worries, because with the punch you can just line it up to where it's straight. I did the sentiment in, I heat embossed it in gold, but I wanted to see what it would look like if we used the rich razzleberry and just stamped the sentiment. Bring out even more of that purple color. So I've got my scrap piece of Whisper White here. I'm going to bring in my sentiment and my rich razzleberry ink. Just ink it up and do it over on this edge. Just setting it down, firm, even pressure. Give it a couple of seconds. And there we have it. I'll let that dry for just a second. With your punches, oh, let me put the lid on my embossing powder before I knock it all over the place. That would be a disaster. Okay. Your punches come to you closed. If you turn it over, you'll see this little lever down here. All you do is, with your thumb, push it up, and it pops right open. And you may want to put it in like this to stamp it, but you really want to be able to see what you're doing. So you're always using it in the reverse. So simply put your stamped image in there, line it up. I guess I should do it this way so I can make sure it's lined up. That always helps. And as you can see, I had stamped it just a little crooked, but through the magic of punches, when I punch it out, it straightens it up. And there we have it. I think I'm really going to like that on here, just because it tends to pop out at you a little bit better. But we stamped it onto a piece of Whisper White, and we're laying it down where there's quite a bit of white left on the design panel. I wanted to give it some definition. And there's a little trick for that. If you look here, you'll notice that I have a border of rich razzleberry. But how did I get it at the top and bottom? Because when I punch it, it's going to be exactly the same size. Well, let me show you. You're just going to take your rich razzleberry cardstock, punch out a colored piece. You don't have to punch out two. And then as you can see, I can get it at the top, but there's nothing at the bottom. Well, to fix that, just cut it in half. Nobody's going to see the back of it anyway. And now we can take each one of the halves and we can glue it at the top and the bottom. So what I'll do is, I've got my sentiment panel. I'll turn it over and just put some glue down here. And I'm not going to take it all the way down to the center because I know I'm having this pop up a little bit. And then I'll lay this on there and just line it up like that. Now I can take the other piece and do the same thing. It's really easy to line these up because the sides, you don't want the rich raspberry sticking out of the sides, so that makes it pretty easy to line up, and then just pull it out at the top until you have it where you want it, and then press it down and give it a moment to set. Now that looks much, much better, but I've still got white sides. No worries there. Let's just bring back in our stamping pad. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the edge and just gently press it down until I get a little bit of color right there on the edges. You don't see it very much yet because I just did a little bit, but when I lay it down, then it really pops out at you. Okay, now we're ready to go ahead and attach it to the card. And I did want to pop this up for a couple of reasons. First, you know me, I love dimension, but also we have some gold leaves that we're going to be sticking in, and I wanted them to be behind the sentiment. So I'll just go ahead and I'm going to put my dimensionals, one at the top, one at the bottom, and then one on either side. And that should be enough to support it, especially since you've got an additional layer of cardstock there. Peel off those backings, if they'll come off. Come on. And now I'm going to bring the card towards me and decide where I want it. Now, if you feel like your fingers get in the way, I have a pair of reverse tweezers. You can go ahead and grab it with your reverse tweezers, and that can help you position where you want it. And then just gently lay it down. Don't press yet. Pick it up, and that way if you need to make any adjustments, like moving it over a tad, you can because you haven't pressed down. All right, now let's work on those leaves. And I just have a little leaf die, and I used some gold foil paper to cut out 3 leaves. There are also leaf punches that you can get that you could use for that as well. But I wanted something open and airy because I didn't want just a bunch of gold in one spot to draw your eye to it. And I'm going to attach this with my liquid glue again. Here, there's not a lot of surface area, but if I can just get it along the spine, just a thin bead, like that. Decide where I want this to go and position it there and press it down. And I've got 2 leaves at the top area and 1 towards the bottom area. So again, I'm overlapping my leaves because in nature, oftentimes you see leaves overlapped. So it helps it look more organic. All right, last leaf going down. Oh, get that glue everywhere. And this one I just wanted peeking out. And I'm going to press it down with my tweezers here because I can't get my fat fingers in there, and just make sure it gets good contact. And there we go. Now that looks lovely. I really think that the heat embossed gold and the gold in the die cut leaves go so well together. And I'm happy that I decided to stamp the sentiment in color rather than gold. I just felt like there was maybe a little more gold on the first card than what I really wanted. But you know me, I can't stop there. I've got quite a bit of white space here, and white space is great. It helps your colors stand out, but there are also wonderful opportunities for you to go in and add embellishments. And that's what we're going to do. And I've got two different embellishments here. These are the brand new Share What You Love Artisan pearls that I believe you'll be able to pre-order in May. And then I have our basic pearl jewels that are available now. And what I did was I took my rich Razzleberry light and colored in a couple of the pearls. And it dries very quickly. And that way I can color match my embellishments to my images on my card. And I decided that I would use the rich Razzleberry ones more towards the sentiment area. And then I would use the pearl, the bigger pearl ones, sorry, the gold tone, these right here, gold tone Share What You Love Artisan pearls. I would use those along the outside, kind of to complement the gold. We also have the rich Razzleberry in these small pearls, so you can use any of them you like. I'm going to go ahead and put one up here at the top, and I just colored in a couple of the larger basic pearls like that. And then because I like to work in threes, I'm going to take a smaller pearl in color, and I'm going to lay it down on one of these little butts. I think it just really looks cute there. If I can get it lined up. Hello, come on. There we go. And then I'm going to come back with the, and I think these are actually Pineapple Punch color. It's one of our new in colors for this year. And I'm just going to scatter these around the card. So I might put one there. And again, thinking in terms of threes, I think I'll put one right there. And then I've got one more that I'm going to put in a triangle right there. And that's our card done. Does anyone have any questions about how I did the heat embossing? The first time that you play with heat embossing, you're going to be very timid about it, but don't be. I assure you that it's just very, very easy to use a heat tool and to use the Versamark ink and the embossing powder. But the most important tip that I can give you is the Embossing Buddy. The first time that I used heat embossing, I didn't have one of these. And I ended up with gold speckles everywhere on my card. It was not a pretty sight. So just remember that you want to have your Emboss Buddy ready. Make sure you put just a thin powder coating, just tap it on the card, and that way you know that the embossing powder is only going to stick where you stamped your image with the Versamark ink. All right, well, thanks everybody so much for joining me tonight. I hope that you all have a great rest of the week, and I hope to see you back on Saturday for our Anything Goes. Bye-bye now.